My sister-in-law slapped me across the face, right in front of everyone. But the sting of that slap was nothing compared to what came next. My husband, the man who was supposed to protect me, took her side. Not a single word of defense, not even a glance of sympathy. He just stood there, silent. And when I finally stood up for myself, his entire family came at me like I was some kind of criminal. I was kicked out of the very place they called home and pressured to apologize to the person who humiliated me. But what they didn't know, Ashim, was that the woman who once stayed silent, who once endured everything, no longer existed. And what I did next left them completely speechless. I never thought that night would become a turning point in my life. When my husband, Rai, told me his mom was hosting a cozy family dinner, I was genuinely looking forward to it. Not because I adored his family, but because I'd always tried to build that relationship. I tried for him, for the marriage I'd poured my heart into preserving. The evening started off gently. His mother's house was lit warmly, glasses filled with red wine, and laughter echoing through each room. I saw Rai laughing with his dad, his mom refilling everyone's drinks with care, and my sister in law, who proudly calls herself a traditional wife on TikTok, walked in wearing a pristine white dress, flaunting her expensive designer label, and gushing about her latest vacation in the Maldives. I smiled, tried to blend in, tried to believe nothing would go wrong tonight. I'd gotten used to her seeing me as a thorn in her side. She'd never been friendly, always sarcastic, always passive aggressive, always acting like I was this modern, arrogant wife who only cared about working and making money, not submitting to her husband like she did. But I thought maybe a happy evening would tone her down a bit. After dinner, music played. Everyone started to dance, a thing my in laws always did, a tradition my own family never had. But I didn't want to be left out. I reached for Rai's hand and stepped into the rhythm. We swayed gently, smiling, laughing, just enjoying that rare moment of being real husband and wife. No work, no stress, none of the heavy silence that often followed our arguments. I had no idea my sister in law was standing right behind me. Just one gentle spin. My wrist grazed a wine glass on the table, and as if fate had scripted it, red wine splashed straight onto her white dress. The crimson spread fast like blood. Her mouth dropped open. I froze. Immediately, I rushed over, apologizing nonstop. I'm so sorry. I didn't see you behind me. I'll pay for the dress. I swear I didn't mean to. I kept repeating it, grabbing napkins, trying to blot the spreading stain from the expensive fabric. Rai handed me more tissues, his face briefly flickering with concern, but her eyes were blazing. Are you blind? She snapped. Do you even know how much this dress costs? Can you afford something like this, or do you need to pay it off in monthly installments for a year? I was speechless. The room fell silent. Everyone turned to watch. I kept apologizing, explaining, but every word just made her angrier. You're clumsy, stupid, and careless. You always have been. I don't know why, but I tried to laugh it off and said, I really am sorry, but I don't have eyes on the back of my head. I didn't know you were standing behind me like a ninja. I thought maybe a little joke would ease the tension. Instead, it was the final straw. Smack. The slap landed straight across my cheek. Hard. Unexpected. Unbelievable. The whole room went silent. I stood there, my face stinging, heart pounding from the pain, the humiliation, the sheer shock. I looked around, waiting for Rai to react, for anyone to react. But they all just stared, as if I was the one in the wrong. You dare speak to me like that? Do you even know what this dress means? What my reputation means? You're nothing. You shouldn't even be wearing your cheap trash dress in my house. Her voice screeched, rising with rage. But the most painful thing wasn't her insult. It was Rye, my husband, who just stood there. He didn't step forward. He didn't say a word. Even as my in laws tried to drag her away, I couldn't speak. I was frozen by the silence of the one person who should have defended me. My sister in law kept thrashing, screaming that I'd pay for the dress, that I was trash, worthless, and Rye, he just stood there, blank faced, emotionless. That's when it hit me. To them, I was nothing but an outsider. Her slap, it hurt. But Rye's indifference, that was the real slap, straight to my heart. I can't quite remember what I felt first after that slap. Was it pain, humiliation, or just the kind of shock that makes you question reality itself? Everything felt like it collapsed into that single, deafening smack, echoing through my head like a blaring alarm. But what truly left me frozen wasn't the slap from my sister in law. It was Rye's silence, my husband's silence. He just stood there. He didn't step forward. He didn't pull me back. He didn't say a word to defend me, not even a soft one. While I was still too stunned to react, her voice, my sister in law's screaming, stabbed through the air like knives against my skin. Do you even know how much this dress costs? You think someone like you can replace it? If you're poor, then hold your liquor. You don't deserve to stand next to this family. I could feel the blood in my veins boil. Not from the alcohol, not from the slap, but from the shame. The shame of being degraded, humiliated so publicly, and no one stepping in to say anything for me. The more I saw Reed just standing there in silence, the more I heard the whispers around me. The more I felt like I was being pushed to the very edge of my endurance. And then my hand moved before my mind could stop it. I slapped her back. That slap didn't carry hatred. It wasn't cruel. It was pure, raw reflex. The instinct of someone who'd been insulted, belittled, disrespected, and left completely alone. The room went deathly quiet. She clutched her cheek, eyes wide in shock, like she couldn't believe what just happened. Maybe she was too used to people giving in, flattering her, always stepping aside. She wasn't used to being challenged. She wasn't used to being fought back, especially not by someone she thought was beneath her. I looked her straight in the eye. For the first time since this marriage began, I spoke with a voice that was calm, but solid as stone. You want me to change dresses? Fine, I'll pay for it. But can you please stop screaming like a spoiled child? A woman who lives off her husband's money and belittles someone for earning theirs honestly is the one who's truly pathetic. I knew that sentence would cut deep. And it did. Chaos erupted almost immediately. My mother-in-law stormed over shouting, "Get away from her, don't you dare touch her again." She shoved me aside and fussed over her daughter like I'd committed an unforgivable crime. And Rye, he finally opened his mouth. But not to ask if I was okay. Not to comfort me, to scold me. You had no right to hit my sister. You went too far. I turned to look at him, the same man who held my hand while dancing not even an hour ago, now glaring, pointing, like I was the sole villain in all of this. An apology and silence would have been enough. You didn't need to say anything more. You just made everything worse. He spoke like a judge, handing down a sentence. I felt my legs go numb. The whole room, those who were just laughing minutes ago, now stared at me like I was a stranger. All because I refused to stay silent while being disrespected. When I finally found my voice, it trembled with anger. She slapped me first. She insulted me first. She humiliated me in front of everyone. And you, my husband, what did you do? Nothing. Not a word. So I'm just supposed to let myself get hit and bow my head in apology? This is the family you expect me to respect? Rye didn't budge. His face turned red, but not from guilt. from embarrassment, because I'd shattered the image of his perfect family that he tried so hard to protect. You should leave. He said it coldly, decisively. I stood frozen. Are you kicking me out? You caused a scene. My sister's crying. Everyone's upset. You should go so she can calm down. What about me? Don't you care how I feel? He said nothing, and in that silence, I understood everything. In this war between his wife and his sister, he'd already picked a side long ago. I walked out of that house like a defeated soldier, but a soldier who had nothing left to lose. I didn't cry. I didn't apologize. I didn't explain. I simply took out my phone, called a car, and left, with the last shred of dignity I had left. On the ride back, I stared out of the window, and for the first time in years, I no longer saw my in-laws' house as something to try and fit into, but as something I desperately needed to escape. And I knew the real battle was just beginning. I left that house in silence. No tears, no begging, no regrets. In the car ride home, I sat behind the wheel of a stranger's taxi. Streetlights flickered past the windows like blades slicing through the shattering memories in my mind. I don't remember how I made it back. I don't even remember what I was thinking during the ride. All I knew was that a gaping hole had opened inside me. Empty, cold, and painfully lonely. I had just been kicked out of a family party by my own husband. Not because I did something wrong, but because I refused to stay silent. When I got home, I sat motionless on the couch in the living room. No lights, no phone. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Maybe a message, a call, some kind of apology, even if it was half-hearted. But that night, my husband never came home. No calls asking if I was okay. No concern for whether I got back safe. Not even a single word to check on me. Instead, near midnight, I received a voice message. Everyone's still really upset. My sister hasn't calmed down yet. My parents think you went too far. If she decides to press charges, I can't not stand with my family. I let out a laugh, an involuntary, bitter, painful laugh. That was my husband, the man who once said he loved me, the man who once held my hand in front of my parents' altar and promised to protect me, to build a life with me, now choosing peace with his sister over standing up for his wife's dignity. Then he added, "If you just apologize to my sister, a sincere apology, this can all be over. No legal trouble, no stress." I set the phone down and closed my eyes, trying to stay calm. I was all too familiar with how often he sided with his sister. From the very beginning, I saw it clearly, but I told myself, who doesn't love their family? I thought if I just tried harder, stayed patient, he would eventually stand by me. Turns out tonight's silence wasn't shock. It was habit. He was always used to standing by her. I remembered the first time I met his family. A casual lunch I hoped would be a warm beginning, but his sister interrogated me like a detective. "What school did you go to? How much do you make? Anyone in your family work for the government?" And Rye? He just sat there, smiling, nodding, like it was all perfectly normal. Later, I told him I felt disrespected. He apologized in that dismissive tone of his and said she was just being protective and that I was too sensitive. I swallowed countless moments of pain just to avoid cracking the bond between him and his family. I spent every Lunar New Year with his side, even when my heart longed to be with my own parents. I learned to cook the way his mother liked, even though she never once complimented it. I attended family gatherings I never want to be at, just to uphold his image. But that slap, and his silence afterward, they woke me up. I couldn't live like this anymore. The next morning, as the sun rose, I packed my things. No tears, no guilt. I folded each piece of clothing like I was folding away the suffocating years of a marriage where I was never truly seen as a wife. I left the wedding ring on the table, then walked out of that house. When Rye called and found I wasn't home, he screamed over the phone like I was the one completely at fault. What the hell are you doing? Running away? Is that your big idea? I'm trying to fix this and you disappear like a child? I stayed calm, my voice steady. I'm at my parents' house, and no, I'm not coming back. I need time, and I'm not apologizing to anyone. The one who should apologize is your sister. Rye lost it. He called me selfish, stubborn, the one who ruined everything. But his words didn't cut me like they used to. I no longer felt guilty for choosing to protect myself. That night, I told my parents everything. My father was firmly on my side. I can't believe Rye turned out to be this spineless. You did nothing wrong. But my mother was different. She said, "Sweetheart, marriage takes patience. Don't throw away your life over something so small." I looked at her, heart sinking. Of course, to her, a slap, public humiliation, being thrown out of your in-laws' house was just something small. Because she lived that way, she endured, but I wouldn't. I wasn't going to live the life my mother had to survive. I opened my phone, found the price of the dress that got damaged, and transferred the money to my sister-in-law. No notes, no apology, just closure for the material part. As for what they owed me, respect, dignity, fairness, they would never repay that. And from that moment on, I knew this marriage was dead, and I was the only one walking away from it, alive and more whole than ever before. After I sent the money to pay for my sister-in-law's ruined dress, I thought that would be the end of it. But the phone kept ringing for days. Calls from Rye, from my mother-in-law, from unfamiliar numbers that I didn't need to answer to know exactly who they were. I stayed silent. Not because I had nothing left to say, but because words mean nothing to people who never truly listened in the first place. I needed time, not to regret, but to test myself, to see if walking away had just been a rash decision. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't anger, it was awakening. And then, after nearly 2 weeks, Rye texted, "We need to meet, talk things through, no arguments, no blame. I just want to understand you better. I won't bring my mom or my sister. I promise." I agreed. Not because I still had hope, but because I wanted to look into the eyes of the man I once called my husband and say it clearly for the last time. I have changed. We met at a small, quiet cafe where no one knew us. I arrived early. No makeup, no fancy outfit. Just myself, a woman who had finally shed the shell of quiet endurance. Rye showed up a few minutes late. Same hurried walk, same hesitant eyes scanning the place before sitting across from me, as if unsure how to start. "I'm sorry," he spoke first. I was surprised, not by the apology, but by, well, how I felt nothing. No relief, no hope, just emptiness. "I know I didn't protect you that day. I shouldn't have stayed silent. I should have stopped my sister, but I just wanted to keep the peace. I didn't think it would go that far." I looked at him slowly and asked, "You didn't know? Or you never wanted to take my side?" Rye sighed and continued, "I really appreciate that you paid for her dress. I mean it, but now you should apologize to her, just once, to put everything to rest." I smiled, a tired, worn-out smile. After I was slapped, after being kicked out of the house, after my husband stood by like a stranger, How many times do I have to bow down before your family decides it's enough? Rai looked away, his voice dropping. My mom and sister, they're furious. If you don't apologize, they say they won't accept you anymore. They're threatening to cut ties with me. And you know they're my family. I set my coffee down and looked him straight in the eye. And what about me? Am I not your family too? Or was I always just the outsider who's allowed to exist only if your sister approves? I began listing it all. Every time his sister humiliated me at family gatherings, every time she mocked me for not having a prestigious degree, for not being classy enough, every time I asked to spend the holidays with my own family and got turned down. Every drop that fell on my self-respect until the glass overflowed and shattered with that slap that night. Rai stayed silent, but his eyes showed confusion. Then he finally said, I just wanted to keep the peace. You're my wife. You understand that, right? I cut him off. No, I'm your wife, not someone who has to suffer just so you can have peace. The air went still. Then I said the final words. I want a divorce. Rai froze. You, you're serious? Completely serious. All this over one slap? No. Over a whole marriage where I was never in the right place. He tried to plead, saying he'd talk to his mom and sister, that we could move past this, that in the future I could spend holidays with my family, that if I didn't want to see his mom anymore, I wouldn't have to. All the things he should have said a long time ago. Now all I felt was exhaustion, weariness, and the overwhelming urge to leave. Before walking out, I said one last thing. I lived in silence for a long time, hoping you'd change. But in the end, I'm the one who changed. I'm not the woman who'll suffer quietly anymore. You can go on being the obedient son, the perfect brother. But me, I'm going to live for myself now. I walked away, no turning back, no regrets, no trembling. Since that day, Rai has texted every day, sometimes angry, sometimes begging, sometimes blaming, sometimes crying. I don't read them. I don't reply. I've already written the divorce papers. My lawyer will contact him in the next few days, and I know this for sure. I've finally saved myself from a life of silence, surrender, and slow collapse. After my final meeting with Rai, I walked out of the cafe with one undeniable feeling. I no longer belonged to his world, a world of slaps, cruel words, and bitter silence. I was no longer the woman who sat quietly in the car after every family party, forcing a fake smile while my sister-in-law threw jabs. No longer the wife who cried into her pillow, alone, branded as the one tearing the family apart. I had changed, and soon they would see it too. 3 days after that meeting, my mother-in-law, Margaret, began bombarding me with texts. You have no right to walk away like this. You're hurting Rai over something so small. A wife should know how to yield. Your husband's family isn't the enemy. You're acting like a spoiled child. If you don't come back, don't blame me for making this public. I read every word, line by line, like echoes from a world I had already rejected. And I replied, for the first time, but also the last time. Margaret, I've spoken to a lawyer. The divorce will proceed legally. And if you or your daughter continue to harass me, I will not hesitate to make public every piece of evidence, every photo, every word, every clip from that night. Your family has humiliated me enough. I've endured enough. Don't test me. I hit send. The screen showed. Seen. But no reply. For the first time, they were the ones who fell silent, not me. Days later, I sat on my parents' balcony, watching the city fade under the amber sky. I opened my phone, and I began to write, not a post to complain, but an open journal entry. I told my story, no names, no specifics, but every detail was the truth. A woman was slapped at a party. No one defended her. Her husband watched. His family forced her to apologize to the one who humiliated her. She walked away with nothing but her dignity and the determination to live a new life. They thought she was weak, but that slap was her awakening. Uh, she didn't need a husband if being loved meant staying silent, apologizing, or bowing down to insults. She didn't need in laws if what they wanted was a puppet, not a person. The post was shared thousands of times. Messages flooded in, words of support, stories from other women from everywhere. I wasn't alone, and neither were they. A week later, I stepped into the law office and signed the divorce papers. I felt light. No tears, no regret. Just a small, quiet smile on my lips. I unblocked Rye, not to talk, but to send one final message. The divorce papers are sent. You can go back to being your mother's obedient son and your sister's golden brother. As for me, I will live for myself, and I will never return to a place where self-respect has no space. He replied, messages full of sorrow, begging, then anger. But I had turned off notifications because his words held no power over me anymore. After everything, I started over. I moved out of my parents' house and rented a small apartment near work. I decorated it with my own hands, each corner, each tiny plant. I began to write, documenting my journey, not to complain, but to remind myself I survived, and I chose myself. I joined a yoga class, signed up for a skill course I had put off for years because I was too busy being a daughter-in-law. I traveled solo to the seaside town I had always dreamed of, but never went because I was expected to spend Lunar New Year with his family. I took photos, kept a journal, and slowly I found myself again, the woman who'd once been swallowed by a silent marriage. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe someone new, maybe not. But I know this much. I no longer need love to feel worthy. I need respect from others and from myself. My story, once thought to end with a slap, was actually just the beginning. A beginning of freedom, self-reliance, and true self-love. And if you, the one reading this, have ever been belittled, pushed out of the picture because you refuse to stay silent, then remember this. You are not wrong. You are not weak. You are not alone. And one day, like me, you will rise and say, I deserve better.